I am here more like an emissary because I am not based in Cuba, but I have been working with artists on the question of expressive freedoms for a very long time. I think what Cuban artists and intellectuals express to me very often is the frustration that they have because they feel that others outside Cuba do not understand that they are still locked in a romantic vision of the revolution that prevents them from understanding the restrictions placed on all Cuban citizens with regard to expressive freedoms, and that they mistake the enabling functions of the cultural ministry for actual legal protections of expressive freedom. The one opinion that I will present is this one, is to the question of how can a Caribbean Cultural Fund avoid participating in Cuban censorship practices? And the answer to that is independent Cuban artists and arts organizations must be eligible to receive funding directly from the Caribbean Cultural Fund, because the principal economic means of censorship by the Cuban government is to limit access to funds only to those artists that the government wants to fund. So any external funder that doesn't create a channel directly to the independent art sector is tacitly participating in that censorship practice. Now, what are some of the challenges to understanding the Cuban situation? And this I say from my experience of talking about these issues for more than 30 years. Cuba is presumed to be a benevolent cultural force in the region and at home by most people who are interested in Cuba, okay? There's an assumption that cultural promotion by the state is the same thing as the freedom to create. In other words, if the government gives money and creates a space for exhibition, that means artists in Cuba are free. The problem with that assumption is that what operates in reality is a duality. The state functions as an enabler and a repressor at the same time. Okay, the same state entities, the same state organizations, and the same state bureaucrats that enable certain artists and intellectuals to work are the same ones that deny that to others and work in tandem with the Ministry of the Interior to police those whose opinions they disagree with. Okay, so the state is enforcing its monopoly on defining national culture, what constitutes legitimate cultural expression, and who is considered an artist.
If I had to reduce my thoughts to a line, it would be that counterculture is the first draft of culture. And that's a problem for people who work through institutions. The Caribbean does not have, very entrenched democratic institutions. It's a similar problem when you look across the Latin America fighting impunity, having institutions that hold governments accountable and make them transparent. So if you do have a foreign funder that can support artistic voices, it has to have the courage to back countercultural voices, because they are the first draft of the next culture. And this is the lesson of established democracies, because Chris Ofili is lambasted for, using dung in his canvases, and then he's an established artist shortly after. You have to have the nerve to back countercultural voices against a society, as in gay writers in Jamaica, which they're now flourishing. That's the point I think I'd make.
Talking about queerness, working with queerness, or working as a queer person, there's a bit of space for that in certain pockets of like the Barbadian art world, or a more Carib global art world, like that community of artists who have the space, access, resources, and reach to show their work abroad. You can have your points of difference, your points of gendered and sexual difference. But the issue is when you experience confrontations with the state and with national narratives at home, like with representatives from culture ministries and such, there's a kind of silencing that happens, a violence of neglect and omission. I know artists, queer artists in more nationally facing exhibitions. I've heard stories where they've been told that they shouldn't mention their sexuality in press releases or public communications, or else the island will destroy them. And so because of this kind of like, this sort of telling, your queerness is written out, written away, and written off. And with those kinds of conditions, some of us leave, partly because there isn't really a culture that supports any artwork that doesn't subscribe to palatable paradise or tourism narratives. If your work isn't a celebratory cultural product, you will be overlooked. And then if you throw any kind of queerness into that, it will either again be overlooked or you can be censored in different ways. So how do we honor discretion without being complicit in the erasure of these lives? And also, what if I'm afraid to work because of what it might mean to be seen? How can we support the making of public work when parts of the public can't see an artist's humanity? And how can you work visually if your visibility already puts you at risk? And how can a fund think and work with that condition in a meaningful way?
In this particular instance, I wholeheartedly support the comments made by Brendan. I think that the law really needs to be utilized, especially in relation to a fund like this, that will be looking at across the board Caribbean support of the artistic community, to take into consideration not just the legal ramifications of artistic development and how it may impact on an artist in their particular culture, but to help protect them. I was really moved by Ada's comments and the difficulties that artists may face for their security, and the law is supposed to be there to protect that, irrespective of whether or not the artwork may contravene or push the boundaries of certain censorship limits. The law is supposed to protect the person, and the cushion that may be able to be provided by such a fund in terms of working and lobbying governments to be more open and expansive, to allow expression, free expression of, is something that is really, I think the fund should really consider how it does that. I mean, you're looking at a real breadth in terms of levels of freedom of expression. And so how you monitor, navigate that is going to be a very difficult endeavor, but I think it's one that is definitely worth doing, because it will allow the artistic community to flourish within the Caribbean and thereby to move worldwide, globally.
I found that I could really identify different trends in each of what each of you said that I could identify that's happening in Haitian society. And it's mostly about, I think, what there is and what there isn't. So the government's stance around culture, really, either of control or a certain form of dismissal, whereas maybe the cultural sector is organized and really tightened and controlled, or left to itself and growing like weed. And so also when Guy mentioned the fact that there are no schools and that there are really no real government program that supports the art, and so there's no real transmission, that you're left to with the support of maybe a couple private organizations that has to provide for all of us, or then you do what you can. So I think in response to the position of the government is going to be the response of the artists themselves, either to stand up and push back against repression, or to find their own means of creation.